Two quick things. I'm very surprised that somebody like Matt Gaetz has such little respect for America's US service men and women, those that give us, the freedom in our lives. They protect us. They're prepared to lay down their lives for our freedoms. Matt Gaetz as well. But coming up, just see how he talks to them as if he's something special. The other thing, very quickly, if you get a moment, please press the thanks button. I know it sounds embarrassing for me to say it, but to buy my team a coffee, $1.99, and be happy with that. Thank you.
This is Colonel Meidas Touch, and this is a photo of him. Did we train and equip him?
By name, I cannot identify that.
Well, that's him with a bunch of U.S. service members outside of our embassy. And just months after this photo was taken in 2021, he led a coup in Guinea and threw out the leader. Does that concern you?
Congressman, core values is what we start off with in IMA programs.
Do we share core values with Colonel Touch?
Core values. I will repeat that.
He led a coup.
We do.
So I guess 4 months after that exchange, General Langley, you had General Moussa Bamou overthrow the government in Niger. It won't surprise anybody here that we trained him. The person who overthrew the democratically elected government in Niger went to the National Defense University, trained at Fort Benning, Georgia. So do we share core values with Moussa Bamou?
Congressman, let me just go ahead and state that core values is what we start off with. But there is no syllabus for overthrowing a government, not in our institutions.
Well, they're learning it pretty well, even in the absence of a syllabus, right? Because if you look at Chad, Burkina Faso, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, in a lot of these countries, the coup is led by someone we trained. Now, I put in the National Defense Authorization Act a requirement for you to issue us a report as to how many coup leaders our taxpayers have funded the training for. That report is due tomorrow. Will we be getting it on time?
I'll do a follow-up on that, Congressman.
Well, I mean, this was the follow-up, right? Because first I asked you in that clip, how many coup leaders did we train? You didn't know. And so then I put it in the law for you to tell me. The law requires you to tell me by tomorrow. So can you give us a preview of coming attractions?
You get that. You'll get your answer, Congressman. But let me say, there's no correlation and there's no causation of U.S. training to these members.
Well, that's what I'm trying to find out, because in like a dozen countries, the coup leaders are people we trained. Like, what a difference a year makes. March 16th, 2023, Secretary Blinken calls Niger, quote, a model of resilience, a model of democracy, a model of cooperation. 1 year and 1 day later, Dr. Wallander, the spokesperson of the Nigerian military, Colonel Amadou Amabrame, says, quote, the American presence in the territory of the Republic of Niger is illegal. A year and a day after our government said they were the model of resilience and democracy, they are throwing us out by the scruffs of our neck. And so is it safe to say that this failed, General Langley?
It's safe to say that there's no correlation or causation of U.S. training to a coup happening, period.
It certainly isn't. There's no causation or correlation to the training we do, creating more stability. I'm trying to ascertain whether or not all this money we spend in Africa makes the place less stable or more stable. And just for a country lawyer like me, if we're funding the coup leaders, that probably strikes me as making it less stable. Now, are you aware of the Iranian efforts to now mine in Niger, General Langley?
Congressman, we could talk about it in a classified section on that.
Well, I mean, Fox News is reporting it. They're saying that Iran is working on economic arrangements to get uranium from Niger. So,
well, in a classified session, we'd talk real intel.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, we've spent more than $500 million in the country. What can you say we've got for that $500 million as we sit here today? If it's like being turned into an Iranian mine, the Russians are the preferred security partner, and we're training the coup leaders.
There was a buy down on an insurance policy for protecting the homeland.
I don't think we're doing that, though. I don't think there's evidence to suggest that.
That's your opinion.
You went to Niger.
I respect your opinion.
Okay, but General Langley, you went to Niger, and you went to have a meeting with the people we trained who overthrew the democratically elected government, and Fox News is reporting that you didn't even get a meeting with the principal decision maker. Is that right?
I had a meeting with my counterpart.
Well, here's the quote. Sources say last week's meeting with the junta was extremely difficult. The administration's envoys did not get to meet with Niger's principal decision maker. Is that a true statement or is that a false statement?
My responsibility is to meet with my counterpart, not
I would just hope that if we train issue leaders, we could at least book a meeting, you know, since it's the model of democracy.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Houlihan.
A diverse and inclusive force is a war-fighting imperative. This is on a slide at the Air Force Academy. General Clark, do you agree with that statement?
I do agree with that statement, sir.
So, I mean, were the Mongols diverse?
Well, sir, I'm not really as versed on Mongol warfighting as I am on U.S. warfighting.
Were the Vikings diverse?
Again, sir, I'm looking at our country, the most diverse country in the world.
Sure, but this is about a war-fighting imperative. How about the force in Ukraine? Are the Ukrainians fighting the Russians a diverse force?
Sir, once again, my concern is the people that I'm charged to build into leaders.
Right, but you would acknowledge that throughout history, including present history, that statement hasn't borne true in every example, right?
Sir, what I would say is that those countries have to rely on the full force of their population to build a war-fighting force to win our wars, and that's why it's important for us to be diverse, because our nation...
So let's look at the population that actually makes up the fighting force frequently. Now, we have more men than women, right? 70-30-ish?
That's correct.
And of the men we have, most of them are not transgender men. Most of them are cisgender men, right?
Yes, sir.
But yet, at our academies, we push something called the Brooke Owens Fellowship. Are you familiar with that?
I am, yes, sir.
And in that fellowship, it specifically says, if you are a cisgender man, this program isn't for you. So you just said that your answer on why we do this full hug of these diversity concepts is because it's all about the fighting force that we draw from. But you're literally pushing a program in the academies that says, if you're a cisgender woman, a transgender woman, a non-binary, agender, bigender, two-spirit, demigender. What's demigender?
Sir, that's a term of the people that are eligible for that particular scholarship that is available to. It's a person who looks at their gender in a different way than I do, sir.
Well, sure, that's all of these people. You're a cisgender man. You don't even get to apply.
Well,
do you know what demigender really means?
I'm not really sure, sir.
Right. So do you know what agender means? All one word, not a space gender, but agender.
Sir, I don't.
Right. So here we are pushing a fellowship, calling for people that you don't even know what the words mean. And the number one group of people, the cisgender men, are excluded. Now, in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, should we be pushing programs that we can't define that exclude the largest group of service members?
Well, sir, first, that program is not an Air Force Academy program. It's a program open to our entire country.
Right,
so
but you guys advocate for it within the academy.
We allow our cadets to apply for it.
Why are you allowing your cadets to apply for a program when you cannot define the basic terms of eligibility?
Because it's an opportunity for us to develop them as warfighters, and we look for every opportunity that we can.
But you don't even know what the words mean. How can you use this as a way to develop the warfighters if you don't know what it means?
Well, some of those terms may not be applicable to us at the Air Force Academy, but some are.
But if you don't know what they mean, it's hard to tell if they're applicable or not. So I think one of the reasons why some of this stuff has gotten into the academies is because we don't have the same oversight from the Board of Visitors. And, Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from the Washington Examiner entitled, "To Push Woke Ideology, Biden Illegally Gutted Military Academy Oversight Boards." And so in this piece, it goes through a timeline where on September 8th, 2021, all of President Trump's appointees were fired. On September 17th, Secretary Austin created Board of Visitors subcommittees, and then he populated those subcommittees with people who weren't on the Board of Visitors. Have you ever seen that happen before?
Sir, our Board of Visitors is populated and supports us in great fashion.
Right.
So
What about the subcommittee? Are there people on the Board of Visitors subcommittees who are not on the Board of Visitors?
I can't answer that, sir.
Seems like something we ought to know.
Yes, sir. I'm not sure.
Right, but that would be odd, right? I mean, here, okay, let me ask the question this way. You don't have any basis to disagree with the reporting here in the Washington Examiner that literally we have people who are not on the Board of Visitors who are serving on these subcommittees. You have no basis to disagree with that, do you?
Sir, I'm not exactly sure the question you're asking, so I'll have to take that for record so I can understand what you're exactly what you're asking.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative Escobar.
I'd like to thank
service
our
to this
panel
country
for
and the sacrifice
your
that
service
both
to
you
our
and your
nation and
families
for your
have made for the service of our country. I also recognize the very faithful service members of all of our military, some of whom are here today, but over the 20 years of the conflict in Afghanistan, the more than 2,400 who gave their lives for this country, for this democracy, for the rights that we prize here. I also recognize the Gold Star families who are in the room. You know I care desperately that you get the answers that you need, and I appreciate that both of our testifiers here today have talked about that it is a comprehensive look that you deserve. It is not about a single day or a single month. You deserve the answers to what went right with this war and what went wrong. To the Abbey Gate veterans and families, and I see veteran Sergeant Vargas Andrews and your family, thank you for being here yet again. I wanted to start quickly with the testimony before the House Armed Services Committee in September of 2021, where Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said of the timing of the evacuations, "As for when we started evacuations, we offered input to the State Department decision, mindful of their concerns that moving too soon might actually cause the very collapse of the Afghan government that we all wanted to avoid." I wanted to ask both of you, what role did the sudden, just almost instantaneous collapse of the Afghan government play in the events following the continuing evacuation and withdrawal? Can you speak to the utter collapse that seems to have surprised most people?
So operationally, the collapse meant that at HKIA, we depended upon Afghan support to hold the perimeter. They melted away. And that was probably the most significant immediate operational effect of the collapse of the Afghan government and the attendant collapse of the Afghan military. Now, we had a plan for that. We saw it as a possibility, but that's why we had to put in almost 6,000 U.S. forces to replace those Afghans that had melted away. We would have been able to hold HKIA with a far smaller number of U.S. forces had the Afghans remained. But when the government collapsed, they went away. So that had a profound and immediate effect on everything else that followed.
General Milley?
Yeah, I think with respect to what General Austin was saying, that was a concern of the State Department, but there was a general consensus that with complete withdrawal of U.S. military forces was going to lead to a collapse of the government and the ANSF. The issue is timing when that would happen. Most of the assessments indicated, the intelligence community assessments, were 12 to 24 months sort of thing. The military actually had a tighter assessment, and we estimated that the earliest time of complete collapse could be in the fall, maybe around Thanksgiving, something like that. Nothing indicated August per se. Having said that, though, I think that we certainly were advocating for the parallel withdrawal of the embassy personnel and the American citizens with the military, prior to the events of August.
And what role did President Ghani's leaving town?
I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back. I think it was collapsing anyway, but at that point in time, I don't want to make comparisons, I suppose, but you got Ghani and Zelensky, right? Zelensky stays, and his military stays in Kyiv, and you got a nation at war, and they're fighting tooth and nail. And then in this particular case, President Ghani has an entire cabinet, less one. One went up into the Panjshir Valley. The rest of them got on airplanes and took off out of their country. As soon as the ANSF saw that, they literally took their uniforms off, put their weapons down, and it collapsed. It was very, very quick.
As to the drawdown, if I could ask you both, and maybe it's more appropriate to General Milley, but I might be wrong. Under the Doha Agreement, the drawdown to 8,600 troops by June of 2020 was required. But my understanding is subsequent withdrawals were at President Trump's discretion. 4,500 by November of 2020, 2,500 by January of 21, as a new administration is about to take place. It didn't seem ideal by defense officials. On what basis did President Trump order the troop withdrawal to 2,500 in January of 2021?
Well, to back up, the requirement to go to 8,600 was 135 days after the signing of the Doha Agreement. And that was executed. Secretary Esper was the Secretary of Defense. Then Secretary Esper submitted a recommendation, and I concurred with it, to withdraw to 4,500 and hold at 4,500 until all the conditions were being met. Secretary Esper was removed from office on the 9th of November. On the 11th or 12th of November, I was handed a piece of paper with the president's signature on it, which had two sentences. One was withdraw all forces from Somalia by the 15th of December, and then withdraw all forces out of Afghanistan by the 15th of January. We went, the Acting Secretary of Defense Miller and I and others went over to the White House to confirm that order because we had not been consulted on that. So we did, and that order was then subsequently rescinded, and on the 17th of December or November, another order was received, signed by Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor to the President, which directed at that point to come down to 2,500. 2,500 was always given as the min force required by the military as a recommendation to two consecutive presidents.
And yet momentarily the president, the former president, placed an order to withdraw everybody.
Well, there was a draw down to zero, and then you may recall, I think somebody had mentioned it, that there was kind of there was some discussion of everybody's home by Christmas, that kind of thing. But the actual formal orders is what I just discussed.
Again, I thank you for your service, and I thank all the military families.
Gentle lady's time's expired. Chair now recognizes Miss Young Kim.
Thank you, Chairman McCall and Ranking Member Mix for holding today's hearing. I want to thank General Milley and General McKenzie for coming before our committee with your testimonies. And I do also want to welcome the Gold Star families and veterans. Thank you for your service. Following the chaotic withdrawal of, from Afghanistan, President Biden stated that he owes no apologies for how the withdrawal was conducted. I disagree. To this date, we're still unclear on how many Americans were left behind in Afghanistan and remain there, not to mention Afghan allies that helped our service members with translation services and intelligence gathering. That could have been prevented if the withdrawal was not carried out in a way that was dismissive of advice coming from the DoD's top leadership. President Biden also promised in an ABC News interview just a few days after the Taliban takeover of Kabul that if there are American citizens left, we're going to stay until we get them all out. Well, that's not happened. So General Milley and General McKenzie, did you consider this promise an order from the president?
No, the ABC interview, I wouldn't consider that an order. We receive orders from the White House in formal ways. It has been like this for decades. Typically, they are signed by typically the National Security Advisor to the President, and then that's transmitted to the Secretary of Defense, chain of command, and then the Joint Staff and the Chairman will take those orders, turn them into military orders to transmit to the combatant commanders. So I wouldn't consider an ABC interview or any other means of immediate communication as a quote-unquote an order.
General McKenzie?
I think General Milley described it exactly correct.
Was there any contingency planning with the State Department to ensure that no citizens would be left behind?
After we departed on the end of August.
Asking prior to the withdrawal, was there contingency planning with the State Department?
So we always planned for capacities. For example, from the very beginning, CENTCOM worked with a number of about 150,000. That's how many people we thought, that goes back to June of 2020. That was the number that we thought would have to come out. So the Department of Defense's responsibility there is to make sure you got the airplanes to move them, you can process them. But it's up for the Department of State to say who's coming out, how you're going to categorize those people, how you're going to sort them, and how you're going to get them there. And that's when I would talk about the velocities, the different velocities of the two departments. We were pretty straightforward with our ability to do that, but we're dependent on the Department of State actually to make those decisions that turn our ability into actual movement of human beings.
Sure. So we talked about how President promised that during that ABC News interview, but when did you realize that President Biden's promise would be broken?
I'm sorry, just help me with that.
When did you realize that President's promise of getting every one of the American citizens left in Taliban will be left? I mean, we'll get them out. When did you?
Yeah, I would say by mid-July of 2021, I was concerned, given events in Afghanistan, about the state of the Department of State's planning and their ability to execute a NEO. Now, I never thought we'd get everybody out. I always thought there would be some, you're never going to attain perfection there, but you'd want to get that number as small as possible. So I knew there would be people left behind. We weren't going to be able to get everybody out, but you wanted to get as close to zero as you can.
Were you told by that same administration just days later to leave Americans behind if it meant getting out by August 31st?
No, I was never told that, but I would share with you my advice in late August was we needed to get out by the 31st. If we did not leave by the 31st, it was clear to me from our intelligence reporting and a number of other sources, we would have been fighting the Taliban. So I thought you want to get out by the 31st and then resort to diplomatic means to bring your citizens that don't get out by the 31st out. Otherwise, you're going to have to pour thousands more forces into Afghanistan just to stay there and permanently impair your opportunity to get citizens out, not to mention the tens of thousands of at-risk Afghans that you would like to get out that are actually, of course, at much higher risk.
Let me ask General Milley my last question. You previously testified that during the NEO, you and General McKenzie both recommended against keeping U.S. forces in Afghanistan past August 31st. So why would you recommend this, even with hundreds of Americans and tens and thousands of Afghan allies left behind?
Well, for the very same reasons that John McKenzie just outlined. I think to keep them past the 31st, you're already at a very small number. You would have had to increase that number by tens of thousands in order to stay there and continue fighting now what would be the Taliban. As far as the American citizens, it wasn't clear then, and it's still not clear to me what those numbers are or were. And that was never clarified by anyone in the State Department, exactly how many, where they are, who they are they out in Herat, are they down in Kandahar? We can't, unless you put tens of thousands of troops in there, we cannot be bouncing around a country that's at war and trying to look for this person and that person. It's just not realistic. It's not a feasible course of action. And by the end of August, especially after the 26th Abbey Gate, absolutely not feasible. So at that point in time, your choices are extend well into September, October. You could look forever because you don't even know what number you're looking for, and you don't even know where they're at. So those weren't feasible or acceptable courses of action at the time, although I do understand the human desire, but didn't know numbers, didn't know necessarily where they were, and so on and so forth. So not a realistic option.
Got it. Well, thank you very much. My
No,
time.
ladies, time's expired. The chair recognizes Mr. Moskowitz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Generals, for your service to the country. And echoing comments of my colleagues, I want to obviously extend my condolences to the Gold Star families here and that were here earlier and paying the ultimate sacrifice for our country. I also want to recognize the sacrifice of our colleague Brian Mast for his service in Afghanistan. A lot of people on this committee do a lot of great things in service to the country. I want to thank our colleague Corey Mills, who just over the weekend helped in getting people out of Haiti. And I hope, Mr. Chairman, we can soon get a classified briefing on the situation going on there. This obviously is a very important topic today on what happened with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Why it did not go according to what the experts in the Pentagon and in our intel community believed. I think we need to know what gaps existed. I think we need to know how that happened. I need to know the lessons that were learned. And most importantly, how do we prevent something like this from happening in the future? we had soldiers die over the 20 years of war, and we had soldiers die on the withdrawal. And I think multiple things can be true. A lot of times in this town, we like to, it's an and or kind of deal, right? It's either Trump was responsible or Biden was responsible, right? I actually think in Afghanistan, it's an and, quite frankly. I think there were mistakes made in the withdrawal. I think the American people think there were mistakes made in the withdrawal. And I think it's okay to admit that. I mean, what's the opposite of that? That the withdrawal was perfect? Everything went according to plan? General Miller, do you think mistakes were made in either the planning phases, things that we thought were going to happen that didn't happen, or things on the ground that unfolded that we didn't plan for? You think mistakes were made in all of that thought process?
There's zero doubt in my mind there were mistakes made, and that's the point of the after-action reviews. Identify those mistakes and develop solutions to implement them in the future. And I think the fundamental mistake, fundamental flaw, was the timing of the State Department call of the NEO. I think that was too slow and too late, and that then caused a series of events that result in the very last couple of days. There's a lot of other mistakes that are made along the way. I try to cover them in a written statement to submit to you guys. But I think that was, germane to this particular hearing. I think that was key. I think that was fundamental.
Yeah, and reading the dissent cable, which I won't discuss here, but I mean, do you think some of the intelligence that you all used, our military leaders used?
I think for the intelligence, we pulled off in the summer of 20. So when we went to 8,600 in accordance with the Doha Agreement, and then you drop from 86 to 45, you're pulling advisors off the so-called Kandaks, the battalion, the Afghan battalions. What that then means is we don't have a fingertip touch for what's going on in the Afghan security forces. We couldn't see. We blinded ourselves when you pull those advisors off. So we relied on electronic means or technological means in order to be able to see what's happening with the Afghan security forces. But technology can't read a person's heart. They can't see the negotiation that's going on locally between the Taliban and the local Afghan. So we lost our ability to really sense that environment with a degree of granularity that could make better predictions than what was turned out. And I think that's true of the intelligence community, and the military writ large, et cetera. So I think that was a major gap, was our ability to see into what was happening on the ground, because we pulled our advisors out. And that's going to happen when you pull advisors off.
And there's no doubt that mistakes were made by multiple administrations over 20 years that I'm sure we can point to when the full after-action review is completed. You think it was a mistake by the previous president to invite the Taliban, which you call a terrorist organization, to Camp David?
I won't comment on that. That's a political act, and I'll stay out of that. But on mistakes, I think one of the key ones, to be very candid with you, is the development of the ANSF writ large, which begins, of course, in early 2000s. And I was part of that, Frank was part of that, and many of us were part of that. The number of security forces were too small. We, the military estimated we needed 600,000 to 700,000. Decisions were made by the bond agreement to field them at 350,000. Half of those were police, and they were completely not designed well for a counterinsurgency type of environment. So you're looking at about 175,000 Army, and the Taliban had fielded about 100,000 Taliban. So your force ratios, your correlation of forces between the insurgent and the regime forces was always balanced more in favor of the Taliban. And then they had a sanctuary over in Pakistan. These were decisions from 04, 05, and 03, that kind of thing. But they have second and third and fourth order consequences to the outcome of this war. So by the end of the day, the Taliban or the ANSF, there was mirror imaging going on. We tried to build a conventional army. We didn't build their commandos and special forces till late. There's a whole series of these that go way back in time that ultimately end up in a collapse of the Afghan security forces under intense pressure by the Taliban in the summer of 21.
Thank you, General. My time has
expired. Chair recognizes Mr. Huizenga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A diverse and inclusive force is a war-fighting imperative. This is on a slide at the Air Force Academy. General Clark, do you agree with that statement?
I do agree with that statement, sir.
So, I mean, were the Mongols diverse?
Well, sir, I'm not really as versed on Mongol warfighting as I am on U.S. warfighting.
Were the Vikings diverse?
Again, sir, I'm looking at our country, the most diverse country in the world.
Sure, but this is about a warfighting imperative. How about the force in Ukraine? Are the Ukrainians fighting the Russians a diverse force?
Sir, once again, my concern is the people that I'm charged to build into leaders.
Right, but you would acknowledge that throughout history, including present history, that statement hasn't borne true in every example, right?
Sir, what I would say is that those countries have to rely on the full force of their population to build a war-fighting force to win our wars, and that's why it's important for us to be diverse, because our nation...
So let's look at the population that actually makes up the fighting force frequently. Now, we have more men than women, right? 70-30-ish?
That's
right.
correct.
And of the men we have, most of them are not transgender men. Most of them are cisgender men, right?
Yes, sir.
But yet, at our academies, we push something called the Brooke Owens Fellowship. Are you familiar with that?
I am, yes, sir.
And in that fellowship, it specifically says, if you are a cisgender man, this program isn't for you. So you just said that your answer on why we do this full hug of these diversity concepts is because it's all about the fighting force that we draw from, but you're literally pushing a program in the academies that says if you're a cisgender woman, a transgender woman, a non-binary, agender, bigender, two-spirit, demigender. What's demigender?
Sir, that's a term of the people that are eligible for that particular scholarship that is available to. It's a person who looks at their gender in a different way than I do, sir.
Well, sure, that's all of these people. You're a cisgender man. You don't even get to apply.
Well,
do you know what demigender really means?
I'm not really sure, sir.
Right. So, do you know what agender means? All one word, not a space gender, but agender.
Sir, I don't.
Right. So here we are, pushing a fellowship, calling for people that you don't even know what the words mean, and the number one group of people, the cisgender men, are excluded. Now, in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion, should we be pushing programs that we can't define that exclude the largest group of service members?
Well, sir, first, that program is not an Air Force Academy program. It's a program open to our entire country.
Right,
so
but
you
guys advocate for it within the academy.
We allow our cadets to apply for it.
Why are you allowing your cadets to apply for a program when you cannot define the basic terms of eligibility?
Because it's an opportunity for us to develop them as warfighters, and we look for every opportunity that we can.
But you don't even know what the words mean. How can you use this as a way to develop the warfighters if you don't know what it means?
Well, some of those terms may not be applicable to us at the Air Force Academy, but some are.
But if you don't know what they mean, it's hard to tell if they're applicable or not. So I think one of the reasons why some of this stuff has gotten into the academies is because we don't have the same oversight from the Board of Visitors. And, Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record an article from the Washington Examiner entitled, "To Push Woke Ideology, Biden Illegally Gutted Military Academy Oversight Boards." And so in this piece, it goes through a timeline where on September 8th, 2021, all of President Trump's appointees were fired. On September 17th, Secretary Austin created Board of Visitors subcommittees, and then he populated those subcommittees with people who weren't on the Board of Visitors. Have you ever seen that happen before?
Sir, our Board of Visitors is populated and supports us in great fashion.
Right, but what about the subcommittee? Are there people on the Board of Visitors subcommittees who are not on the Board of Visitors?
I can't answer that, sir.
Seems like something we ought to know.
Yes, sir. I'm not sure.
Right, but that would be odd, right? I mean, let me ask the question this way. You don't have any basis to disagree with the reporting here in the Washington Examiner that literally we have people who are not on the Board of Visitors who are serving on these subcommittees. You have no basis to disagree with that, do you?
Sir, I'm not exactly sure the question you're asking, so I'll have to take that for record so I can understand what you're asking.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative Escobar. I'd like to thank our panel for your service to our nation and for your...
I recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Secretary, you told Senator Schmidt yesterday that if the 8,000 plus service members who've been separated from the military due to the vaccine mandate want to reapply, that they're welcome to do so, but that you would do nothing to solicit their reapplication or to incentivize it. Why is that?
I think it's incumbent upon the individual to make that decision and reapply. The mechanisms are there.
Yeah, but why don't, I mean, you're overseeing a recruiting nightmare in our military right now. These are 8,000 patriots. And by the way, your department broke the law in administering the vaccine mandate. And that's not me saying so. That's the Inspector General for the Department of Defense who wrote on June 2nd of 2022, we found a trend of generalized assessments rather than the individualized assessment that is required by federal law.
The department did not break the law.
So the DOD, so wait, you mean the IG is wrong? You think the IG is wrong?
Mandate
He says he broke the law.
The lives of a number of...
Well, it ruined the lives of a number of people too. And it ruined the lives of people who love our country and want to re-enlist. Let me ask you this question. If we direct you by force of law to re-engage and incentivize the re-enlistment of these folks with full back pay and rank, do you have the capability to follow that instruction?
You put provisions in the law to enable those people those former service members to reapply in accordance with the service
Good. Well, we will do that just like we had to put the repeal of the vax mandate in the law. And I get the sense that the only reason you're not reaching out to these folks is pride, because otherwise they would be totally able to serve. And it seems that your personal pride is getting in the way. So going from the deeply serious things that we're not doing, re-engaging these 8,000 folks, to the deeply unserious things that we are doing, go ahead and put up the first slide. I guess my question is, how much taxpayer money should go to fund drag queen story hours on military bases?
You know, drag queen story hours is not something that the department funds.
Well, wait a second. That's actually not what the record seems to suggest. You were going to fund one at Ramstein Air Force Base. That one got canceled, but that's DOD insignia. That's a drag queen story hour for children. Then also at Malmstrom Air Force Base outside of Great Falls, Montana, you had a drag queen story hour for kids. At the Joint Base Langley Eustis, you put on a drag queen story hour on a Saturday for the first ever kid-friendly diversity, equity, inclusion summer festival. And at Nellis Air Force Base, you had the Drag You Nellis on June 17th. Who funded these things, Mr. Secretary?
Listen, drag shows are not something that the Department of Defense supports or funds. So.
Well, wait, why are they happening on military bases? I just showed you the evidence. Why are they happening?
I will say again, this is not something that we support or fund.
Well, so you think hosting a drag queen story hour on a military base isn't supporting the drag queen story hour?
I stand by what I just said.
But you may stand by it, but it's belied by the evidence over and over again. I mean, are you aware of the piece? Biden's military, Air Force Base in Montana holds drag show, drag queen story hour for kids in the Western Journal. Are you aware of that?
Again, I will say what I've said before.
You're saying what you're saying, but I guess it just doesn't comport with the facts. General Milley, this will be my last time to question you. You mentioned 2 years ago that you wanted to better understand white rage. And so my question is this. Did you read this book?
No, not at all.
It is What is White Privilege is the book, and it's actually written by a DOD official, a senior official in diversity, equity, and inclusion, and there are now hundreds of these books in dozens of schools, and I wonder if you guys connect this to your problems with recruiting.
I've never read it, never seen it. Frankly, I don't even think about that stuff. I think about
go ahead and put up the next slide.
About the readiness of the force.
Go ahead and put up the next slide, please. Okay, well, in the next slide, this is a tweet by one of your employees in charge of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it's patently racist. They say that she had to give Karen the business, that she talks about caudacity, presumably of Caucasian people. So I guess,
terrible.
Why does the...
look at it.
Well, why is that person
You're not
so
getting an
low?
argument from me. That's terrible. It's wrong. She shouldn't be doing that, period.
Should she be fired?
That's a DOD employee. not U.S. military uniform.
Should they be fired, Secretary Austin?
Again, as you heard in your subcommittee here, this incident was investigated, and
they're
of course
still employed. Mr. Chairman, I have a series of unanimous consent requests since my time has expired.
Without objection.
First is Joint Base Langley Eustis holds drag show at kid-friendly festival. And the next is U.S. military defends drag show at largest training center as, quote, essential to morale. And the next is Nellis Air Force Base hosts first ever drag queen show, essential to morale and readiness. That's a Breitbart piece. And finally, Ramstein cancels library's drag queen story time for Pride Month following criticism.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman's time has expired.
Can I get copies of those? Because I'd like to take a look at those myself, actually. Take a look and find out what actually is going on there, because that's the first I'm hearing about that kind of stuff. I don't read those news stories. I don't know what you're talking about. I'd like to take a look at those, because I don't agree with those.
Well, they're now in the official record.
Shouldn't be happening. Period.
Thank you. Thank you for that admission.
Great.
I would like to point out, Chairman, that our students in Dodea schools scored the highest on, the 8th graders and 4th graders scored the highest in math and reading in the country. So I want to thank all of our Dodea professionals who made that possible, and I encourage them to keep it up.
I hope you're not thanking that one.
Yeah. Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gaetz, for 5 minutes.
General Langley, I have constituents that have been scattered across Africa on train and equip missions. So just ballpark, in the last decade, how many Africans has the United States military trained and equipped?
Congressman, I don't have that figure. I can get that figure for you.
Ballpark, just, how many?
Congressman, it would be a wild guess right now.
Seems like something we should know, right?
Over the years, we have trained a substantial number, especially in the Gulf of Guinea states, but including
like more than 10,000?
It is more than 10,000.
More than 50,000?
I'd say we're reaching around 50,000
okay.
at least.
And what percentage of the people we've trained end up participating in insurrections or coups against their own government?
Very small number, Congressman, very small number.
So what percentage do you think?
I'd say probably less than 1%.
But it does happen.
The IMET program is in force, and we've pushed a significant number through our schools across the
and what data sets do you track to arrive at the conclusion that less than 1% of the roughly 50,000 that we've trained have participated in coups? Because it'd be like about 500, about 1% of 50,000.
Congressman, you may have that information. I don't at this time, but I know.
Well, I know there are some, right? Like go ahead and throw up that image. This is Colonel Mamade Doumbouya. And this is a photo of him. Did we train and equip him? In Guinea?
By name, I cannot identify that.
Well, that guy in the middle with the big red hat, Colonel Mamade Doumbouya, that's him with a bunch of U.S. service members outside of our embassy. And just months after this photo was taken, in 2021, he led a coup in Guinea and threw out the leader. Does that concern you?
Congressman, core values is what we start off with in IMA programs.
Do we share core values with Colonel Doumbouya?
Core values. I will repeat that. Core values. Respect for humanity.
Do we share those values with Colonel Doumbouya?
Absolutely. In our curriculum.
He led a coup?
We do.
Okay, well, that's a very telling answer. In Burkina Faso, did we share core values with the leader that we trained there who led a coup?
It's in our curriculum. We
Leading
stress core
coups are in our
values.
curriculum?
We request civilian-led governance.
Wait, hold on. Is leading coups in our curriculum?
Absolutely not.
So
civilian-led.
My question is, do we share core values with the coup leader in Burkina Faso who we trained?
Holistically, we teach core values with a respect for civilian governance, apolitical, and that's what sticks across a very high percentage in the 99
everybody,
percentile.
Right? But not everybody. And I wonder how many people it takes to to plan a coup? I mean, initially you didn't know how many we trained and equipped. Then you said it was 1%. You had no basis for that 1% number because there's no data set you tracked. Mr. Chairman, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record. Another U.S. trained soldier stages a coup in West Africa by The Intercept.
Without objection, so ordered.
And I further seek unanimous consent to enter into the record. U.S. forces trained the Guinean colonel behind the recent coup in West African country, and this is regard to Guinea.
Without objection, so ordered.
So I guess the question is, why should U.S. taxpayers be paying to train people who then lead coups in Africa?
Congressman, our curriculum harvests core values and also to be able to embolden these countries for a representative democracy.
But General, that democracy isn't what emerges. The problem is, I know you may have great confidence in what you're teaching, but when two governments have been overthrown, I guess how many governments have to be overthrown by people we train before you sort of get the message that our core values might not be sticking with everyone? Is it 5 countries? 10?
We'll continue with our persistence in assuring
but do you think it's
that they harbor democratic norms, democratic values.
Just a moment ago, you said we shared core values with Colonel Doumbouya. You said that just moments ago in response to my question, and his core value seems to be leading a coup. So I don't think it's stuck. I think we should at least know how many countries we train the coup plotters in. How many is too many? Because clearly 2 is not too many, and I think we could use our resources far more effectively than doing this.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Ryan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. In particular, I just want to thank